Now, it's not only the public who are fed up with the royal whingers. Netflix have issued an ultimatum to the Sussexes. They've essentially said, make some decent content or you're out. That's pretty much it. The couple have only received half of their reported $121 million contract, and they need to come up with successful shows if they want the rest. Joining me now is GB News presenter Darren Grimes. Darren, we know Spotify have already dumped them. What kinds of shows would they need to produce to get back in the good books with Netflix?
Look, I mean, they would have to produce something spectacular, wouldn't they? Because the two of them are vacuous, vapid, and vain. And that's the problem here. I mean, it's hilarious, Rita, that they're being called unproductive by Netflix and Spotify chiefs, if reports are to be believed. I mean, they cried about the hardships of being working royals in racist old Blighty, according to them, only to find, Rita, that producing a few vacuous podcasts was too much like hard work. And you just think, these poor dears, Rita, how are they going to manage to pay off this Montecito mansion now?
Oh, well, I mean, if they've already got way more than they deserve, if you ask me, especially after having a look at that, was it a 6-part documentary they called it? It was a reality series, but the most boring reality series ever produced. And this week's Harry's wish list of people he wanted to interview for his podcast was revealed. Among the famous people he was interested in sitting down with were Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, Mark Zuckerberg and Pope Francis. The fact that Harry was entertaining these people as possible guests apparently left Spotify executives rather amused. Darren, was Harry and his inflated ego suffering from delusions of grandeur here? Should he have set his sights a little bit lower?
Do you know, I don't blame the Spotify executives for being absolutely bemused by that, right? Because Harry is about as thick as two short planks. We know for a fact he was talking there apparently about wanting to explore their childhood traumas. I mean, this is this goes to the very crux of Prince Harry, Rita. Harry sees himself as a perpetual victim. Now, Rita, you know, we all understand that losing a mother at a young age can, of course, be tough. But I mean, lots of us across the West, Australia, Britain, America, we come from fatherless homes these days. You know, you don't go about playing the victim card every 2 seconds like Prince Harry does, especially not if you grew up in a palace, for goodness sake, if you attended the uber posh private school of Eton, if you inherited millions of pounds, and then you complain about the struggles of entering the working world only to sit around in a Montecito mansion without bothering to produce a few lousy podcasts from said mansion. Get off your privileged backside. That's what I say, Rita.
Oh, well said indeed. And Harry's not the only Sussex with big guest ideas. Meghan apparently asked Taylor Swift to appear on her podcast and even sent the pop star a personal letter. But despite that extra effort, Tay still snubbed the invitation. Well, if they can't get Putin, the Pope or Taylor Swift, who should they be targeting? Give us some ideas here. Help them out, Darren. Who can they get to sit down with them, produce some compelling content so they can hold on to those rich contracts?
Well, listen, I mean, the cast of some reality television shows, you know, the Kardashians, I think that's the only pool that they're going to be able to operate in, Rita, because they're about as tacky and desperate as the Kardashians. I'll tell you that much for free. Listen, I actually think Spotify should have let Prince Harry attempt to interview President Putin, Rita, because never mind this Wagner group scaring Putin into hiding. If you can imagine Prince Harry heading to Moscow and interviewing President Putin, after just half an hour listening to Ginge and the Whinge, he'd have ran to the exit, right? He would have exiled himself out of choice for a bit of peace and quiet after putting up with that petulant pair. I'll tell you that much. Taylor Swift, she clearly could see that the writing is on the wall for this plastic pair. The empire made of sand is crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a tidal wave, Rita. And Taylor Swift is far too intelligent, far too successful to deal with this desperate couple.
Well, let's go to British politics now. And Rishi Sunak has been slammed for shifting costs back to consumers with news that households will be paying £170 each a year for a green levy. This is going to just be more cost on their energy bills. I mean, are the Tories determined to lose power, Darren, in more ways than one? I mean, this obsession with green and net zero, it is really hurting people and plunging so many into energy poverty.
Exactly. I mean, we're seeing both going on. We're more extreme in Britain than you are in Australia currently. But, you know, on both sides of the pond, Rita, I think we are sacrificing the working class people on the altar of greenery, of wackery and wokery. I mean, we're adding £170 on energy bills in additional green taxes in this country by a Conservative government. But we keep being told by the eco-extremists that we've got the technology there to get to net zero with a few windmills and solar panels. Well, why do we then need to subsidise hard-pressed taxpayers to fund these energy sources if you keep telling us that they're cheap as chips and incredibly viable? It's just obviously because it's not true. It's more made up than a Meghan Markle Oprah interview. You know, bills are going up in this country, Rita, because guess what? The energy grid can't handle the energy produced by those windmill things. So we're actually having to pay £200 each as bill payers for turbines in Scotland, windy Scotland, to be switched off. And I would laugh if it wasn't so serious and depressing. We know for a fact that these things are expensive. They're unreliable. We can't store the energy, so we need gas, coal and nuclear to actually keep the lights on and taxpayer subsidies to keep the green fat cats happy. It's all a big green con, Rita. And I don't know if you read this actually, but there was a report last winter in Britain that we had a pensioner actually freeze to death. And she told her family during an inquest that she was too afraid to put her heating on for the sheer cost, fear of the cost. And that was in Manchester, quite a working class area in England. And do you know what, Rita? That actually makes me hopping mad, because it is well-heeled middle-class hippies in Just Stop Spoilt Brats. Is that their name? Who Rishi Sunak is actually pandering to here. And working class people cannot afford to take the hit. It'll be working class pensioners who suffer because they are too afraid to put the heating on and they end up dying of the cold. It is the cold that is the biggest weather-related death impact in this country, and that's the one form of energy that we're actually depriving people of. It's terrible, Rita, so terrible.
Absolutely. You know what? That is true in Australia. We had a report several years ago, I've written about it several times, where in just two emergency centres in two Melbourne hospitals, they had more than 24 people present with hypothermia, people who were found indoors, who are not turning on their heating. And we're in a relatively warm climate. So even in Australia, the cold kills far more people than the heat. And we've got people who are too afraid to turn on their heaters because those bills are crippling. You're so right. And you mentioned windmills. Well, the Telegraph's reporting that a string of offshore wind projects meant to power Britain are in jeopardy after the global race to net zero sent costs soaring, casting doubts over the industry's future as a cheap source of energy. Well, duh. We have the nation that spawned Greta Thunberg. Even Sweden is turning away from 100% renewable madness in favour of nuclear. Darren, what will happen? Because you've got now these major renewable projects deemed unviable just a year after winning big government contracts.
Absolutely. I mean, our politicians, Rita, are actively choosing to make our country both colder and poorer. And this is all, as you well know in Australia, this is all at a time when President Xi is burning more coal than Sauron sodding Mordor, Rita. It's obscene, right? And this is all at a time as well. You've got it compounded by the fact that the crazy London Mayor Sadiq Khan is destroying our capital city with ULEZ. That's the ultra low emission zone. That actually coerces Londoners, Rita, into parting with £12.50 each day for the act of heresy against the Greta gospel of driving a car. That might be driving a car to work, driving a van to work. And, you know, at the same time, you've got the likes of Greta Thunberg and all these celebrities and musicians attending the lefty liberal festival Glastonbury. And guess what, Greta? Greta, I'm calling you Rita. That would be a terrible
Greta?
thing.
How dare you? How dare you?
I think
You've
I ought to be
stolen my
cancelled for that. I
childhood.
ought to be cancelled.
How dare you?
I ruined your dreams. But Rita, the doomsters and the gloomsters, they were so terrified of carbon emissions at Glastonbury that guess what? They ditched their festival in helicopters to get away from the event. So scared of carbon emissions.
Of course.
It's the ultimate green hypocrisy. This is all about control. It's net zero, not for the rich. It's net zero for the working class. It's net zero for those, not those who can afford to dodge the entire thing altogether. It shows just how hypocritical they really are, and any genuine conservative government would actually look at the evidence, Rita. They would look at the things like we've just been talking about there, about whether the cold affecting people more than heat. We need energy. We need reliable forms of it. That means nuclear, it means gas, and it even means coal. Because I tell you what, Rita, we are in for a world of pain if we continue down this completely insane and unscientific path.
Absolutely. And you know what? The Tories won in a landslide, but they've governed like they're a Labor government. This green madness, they've done really nothing to do to control illegal immigration, all sorts of areas where you wonder, how are they Conservative government? How are they behaving even remotely like a Conservative government? They're not. And I think that is the reason why they're in all sorts of trouble in the polls. Now, before I let you go, I've got to ask you about this Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk cage fight. They say they're dead serious about this. Zuckerberg, despite his appearance, was well trained in martial arts, and he has an unfair advantage in the eyes of many. Yeah, but Andrew Tate has said that he's going to even the score and has offered to personally train Elon Musk. I mean, this just story gets crazier and crazier. How do you see this ending?
Well, look, actually, I wouldn't rule out Elon. I know Zuckerberg may well have had all this training and this fancy, you know, all these new things that he's been learning. But I mean, the man, he creeps me out, Rita. I know that's a really unkind thing to say, but he just has this sort of, you know, nerdy, evil mastermind vibe about him that I think Elon doesn't. You know, Elon, he is, yeah, totally. So I think Elon has got more movement to him, and perhaps he's gonna actually show the world that he's more than just a titan for free speech. But I tell you what, maybe we'll see the Duke and Duchess of Montecito actually calling for this boxing match to be held in their mansion because they're short of a gig or two and they need content for this Netflix show. So there we are, Rita. That's what could be happening.
That's the only way it could get any crazier, if we can get Meghan and Harry involved in that. And Elon is South African. Don't forget that. They breed them tough down there. So let's not rule him out. Darren Grimes, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.